Hi there, and welcome to the 2022 Youth Summit. We are so grateful and excited that you're here. My name is Rafia, and I am a summer associate here at Plan International Canada. I wanted to jump in here to thank you for dedicating your Saturday morning to listen, learn, and to make impacts. Similar to last Youth Summit event, following the event, we will be challenging you to take action. This can mean educating yourself further or even volunteering your time. Take action in a way that is meaningful to you. We'll speak more on this towards the end of the event, but for now, please know that you are in wonderful hands and at a wonderful event hosted by a remarkable changemaker who is also a member of our Plan International Canada Youth Council. So without wasting any more time, enjoy the event and welcome your lovely host, Ayan.
Thank you, Rafia, and welcome all. I'm Ayan. I study sociology and African studies at the University of Toronto, and I'm coming to the end of my first year on Plan International Canada's Youth Council. So I'm very excited for the opportunity to be a part of this event, and thank you all for making the time to be here today. Before kicking off the summit, I'd like to begin by acknowledging my presence on a land that has been a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples since time immemorial. And in 1805, with the signing of the Toronto Purchase, is now the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As many of you may know, in addition to Pride, this month is also National Indigenous History Month. And as we introduce this conversation about displaced people across the globe, it only makes sense that we begin by addressing Canada's own displaced Indigenous communities. Of Canada's 9,985,000 square kilometers, reserve lands make up just 0.2%. But despite centuries of colonial theft and violence, this is still Indigenous land. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They're here and they continue to demonstrate their humanity, their determination, and their talents amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. So today and every day, I encourage you to think about ways to celebrate Indigenous peoples and to support Indigenous rights to self-determination. In particular, I want to call your attention to Land Back, which is a project about reclaiming Indigenous jurisdiction over traditional lands and ecosystems for a sustainable future. You can learn more about the movement at landback.org, so please check it out and take action. Today, we're joined by changemakers throughout the country to deepen our understanding of the refugee crisis and learn more about what we can be doing as advocates. For folks that have attended Plan International Canada programming before, thank you. Thank you for your dedication and wanting to make the world a better place. And for folks that are new, welcome. We're so grateful to have you. If at any point you feel uncomfortable about the topics discussed today, know that we have Plan International Canada staff members here to support you. So you can click on the Contact Us tab or email them at youth@plancanada.ca. As a quick recap, Plan International Canada is a member of a global organization dedicated to advancing children's rights and equality for girls. Plan International has been building powerful partnerships for children for over 80 years and is now active in more than 75 countries. As part of their domestic youth engagement programming, they offer free, inclusive, and safe programs for young people in Canada between the ages of 14 to 24 to deepen their understanding on a range of global issues such as climate change, water and sanitation, food security, and more. Our programs are designed to equip young people with the skills to become active drivers of change and influence decision-making at the community, local, and national levels. With this, here is a quick video of a Plan International Canada 2021 recap.
Our mission at Plan International Canada is to help pave a pathway for children, especially girls, to learn, lead, decide, and thrive. During the past year, amid a global pandemic, we worked in more than 75 countries, impacting the lives of more than 5 million children. We partnered with families, communities, local organizations, and governments to deliver programs that help ensure children are safe, healthy, educated, and empowered. Over 200,000 donors gave $237 million. 81 cents of every donated dollar supported our programs in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. In 2021, 4.5 million children accessed life-saving support against disease. 380,000 children received quality education, and 1.3 million people benefited from our COVID-19 response efforts. We are so grateful for our supporters. Together, we are creating a just world that advances children's rights and equality for girls.
Have ASL available. And to add closed captions, you can click the CC button on the bottom right of the video. For folks that joined the first Youth Summit event in April, you already know that we're using a new and exciting platform called Inventors. And for folks that are new, feel free to explore the website and click the Gaming and Photo Booth tab to expand your understanding of the topics we discussed today. So use the chat and let us know if you attended the first Youth Summit event on April 23rd in honor of Earth Day. The heart of our Youth Summit events is to support you to understand your role as a global citizens and advocates. With this, following this event, we'll be challenging you to deepen your understanding on the topic. And please also know that we have a networking opportunity for 30 minutes at the end of the event. So we hope you can stay online from 3 to 3:30 Eastern Time to connect with one another, as well as some of the change makers you see on screen today. Without wasting any more time, I'm so excited to welcome our first guest, Zabeen Hirji. Zabeen is a remarkable leader, passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the impact on immigrants and refugees. Born in Tanzania of Indian descent, Zabeen immigrated to Canada at the age of 14. Under the strong influence of her mother, Zabeen grew up with a take charge approach to breaking down barriers, and she carried this through her 40-year career at the Royal Bank of Canada, including 10 years as the Chief Human Resources Officer. She shares her thoughts frequently through posts on LinkedIn, so please follow her there to learn more. Zabeen, we're so excited to hear about your journey. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and I'm truly excited to be part of this important conversation today. So let me say a little bit about my story and give you a bit more of a picture of my life. But what I'd really like to be able to do is to also share with you things that I've learned. And a lot of the lessons that I'll share, I know I'm speaking to the future leaders, to youth across the country and perhaps beyond. But many of those lessons, I believe, apply in many different circumstances. And so my hope is that you'll take away some lessons that you can apply, that you can experiment with as you set about your work to make positive change in the world. So I was born in Tanzania, and I'm of Indian heritage. My grandparents immigrated from India in 1910. One set went to Tanzania, my father's side of the family, and my mother's side of the family went to Uganda. And about 65 years later, the pattern was repeated, as we well know. My family in Uganda were actually expelled due to their race and ethnicity, and many were refugees who went to the United Kingdom and Canada. The Hirji side of my family left in slightly different circumstances, However, very much based again on race and ethnicity. Our businesses were expropriated, and so as my family looked to the future of the next generations, they very quickly concluded that it had to be in a different country. And that was my journey to Canada in 1974. I was 14. My father had passed away a couple of years prior, and my mother brought my older brother and myself to Vancouver, Canada. So you can see the theme starting here of a mother who really is very strong, very independent, very resilient. And I would say the resiliency that my mom has had throughout her life, and I'm fortunate to still have her in my life, a very feisty woman at 91. You know, that's really lesson number one from my perspective, is how do you build this resiliency, this ability to bounce back? And for me, what I've discovered, and in some ways, even the last 2 years during the pandemic, where we were all united in common purpose, in common predicament. And really what we saw was how important resiliency is. And that's really this ability to bounce back. And for me, it's been very much about having the support systems around me, family, friends, colleagues, and perhaps more importantly, getting comfortable asking for help. That can be really, really hard. And certainly in the business context, as you become more and more senior, you think that people expect you to have all the answers. The truth is they don't. And in fact, the more vulnerable you can be, the better and stronger many of the relationships and commitments are. So for me, that aspect of support systems and taking care of my physical, of my mental health has really become the top of my list. And I wish I had known that earlier. So that's the first lesson that I leave with you. And you know, it does remind me, given my African part of my family's life and myself, a great African proverb came to mind, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. A few words, but very powerful, and very much the theme of not just my remarks, but my life up to now and my life in this current phase that I call purposeful third act, which really is post my full-time, full-on executive career, where I do things that are commercially oriented, but I spend a big part of my life really as a social entrepreneur. So back to my story. When I came to Canada, my first part-time job, I wish I could talk to you live, but my first part-time job, McDonald's, age 14, $2.10 an hour. Was it glamorous? Of course not. Did I learn a lot? Absolutely. And it really, I think most importantly, there are, of course, soft skills, customer service, teamwork, but it also helped me integrate into my new home. It helped me build a sense of belonging into the broader economy, into broader society, and really built that sense of self-confidence, which was the beginning of my professional journey. After graduating from grade 12, my career was at RBC, as you've heard. I started as a teller with a big raise. I was making $4 an hour at that point, and I think that maybe the interesting twist to my story is about 5 years later, I was a branch manager at 22, the youngest branch manager at RBC, and continued to progress. But in 2007, I was appointed as the Chief Human Resources Officer of the largest bank in Canada, one of the largest in the world. And really, it's a story of from teller to C-suite. That's how people tell it. Was it a straight path? Absolutely not. Many twists and turns, many obstacles along the way. But that's where that resilience comes into play, and really looking at things as a long game. along the way, when things don't go quite right, I've been in jobs that I didn't really love, but what I did was I really looked at that as, what can I make out of this opportunity? How can I use this role to help me develop different skills, or to help me learn about a different business? And looking through that optimistic lens, and that notion of always learning has been another key part of my journey. I've also been told that I am the first South Asian woman to reach the C-suite, not just in financial services, but also in large TSX companies. And the work that I do today is because I don't want to be the last one. And that's a lot of the work that you are doing, and Plan is doing, is really about ensuring that girls and women are really right from when they're young, are given those opportunities, but are also given opportunities that allow them and really push them to dream big, because it is possible. And I've talked about my mom, but I would say that my father, although he passed away before I turned 12, he was way ahead of his time, and he was a feminist. He raised me every day with a mindset of, don't limit yourself just because you're a girl. He took me to work with him. He showed me how the business worked. He treated my brother and I exactly the same. His expectations were the same. The most important marks when I brought my report card home was, what did you get in math? So fathers play a really, really big role in this as well. So let me just summarize a few of my learnings on the career side. One is taking risks. Go outside your comfort zones. Big decisions and every decision. I make it a point, even today, to every day try something new, do something different, talk to someone I haven't talked with before. And really, for me, that has been critical. And you know what? It's a lot of fun too. Resiliency, I've talked about that already. And this maniacal commitment to learning, curiosity, ask questions, and learning. So much of it comes on the job. Of course, there's a formal part to education. I went to Simon Fraser. I have my MBA from there. And in fact, I'm now an executive residence at the business school. But a lot of learning is about building it into the flow of life. Seek feedback. That's something I didn't do as much as I could have. Ask people how you're doing, how you can be better. For myself, every time I do a presentation, I will go back and say, tell me one thing I did well and one thing I could have done better. And that continues to make me better. Judging success by your own standards. That's super important, even more important today with the advent of social media, which of course wasn't there when I was growing up. There's no internet, never mind social media. For me, it was about not comparing myself to others, not looking and saying, oh, I graduated with this person. What are they doing? What's their title? Why am I not there? What is it that you want to achieve? Judge your success by your own standards. And for me, the probably most defining moment there was when I was offered my first my first vice president position. I had just come back from my second maternity leave. My two kids were under the age of 3. I was offered this great promotion. It was a huge milestone. And I instantly said, no, thank you. I can't do it right now because I haven't figured out how to be the kind of mom that I want to be. And there are times when you make trade-offs. There are times when you have to make decisions that your heart tells you is the right thing to do. And in that case, I wasn't worried about what others might think. My judgment at that time about success was, am I doing things to help me be the kind of mom I want to be? And if you really pause to think here about immigrants, about refugees, they come with so many of these skills. They're risk takers. They have left their homes, in the case of refugees, often not even knowing where they're going. And the same thing with immigrants. Many make the decision to go somewhere for a better life. They often, just this week, I met a young woman who came to Canada on her own at the age of 19. And the resiliency, many of these skills. And so as we look to help and support refugees and immigrants, how can we help them tell that story, that narrative that becomes attractive and a way for, in the case of organizations or employment, for example, for that to be recognized. Also, alongside my career, I did a lot of work in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space for the last 20 years, really. I developed RBC's strategy, which was very holistic. We looked at workforce, customers, and communities, and really looked at diversity, but specifically even at newcomers. What are the barriers to entry for newcomers for employment? And what are the advantages? Well, isn't it great to have a newcomer talking to another newcomer about banking in a new country? They can empathize, they can be human, they can understand what the newcomers are going through. And so much of what we do in work and in life is about making that human connection. I also have been very much involved with community organizations. I'll call out a couple. One is Civic Action that some of you may be familiar with. The purpose of Civic Action is to build better, more inclusive cities. It covers the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. I was the board chair until last year and was on the board before. I was on the board for a total of 10 years. And one of the programs there was the Emerging Leaders Network, and the Diversity Fellows was really about building capacity, capability, and connections so that the face of leadership in Toronto looked like the people of Toronto. And that work still remains near and dear to me. I'm still involved. And for those of you in the GTHA area, I would encourage you to look up the Emerging Leaders Network. I've also been involved with TRIAC, the Toronto Regional Immigrant Employment Council, since 2002. And in a nutshell, what they do is they provide mentoring to skilled immigrants to help them find work that is aligned with their skills, their credentials, and their aspirations. And it has a huge success rate. And the message there is some of this work is very much one person at a time. It's one-on-one, it's connecting with individuals, it's getting to know them. And the second message there is the learning is two-way. When you do engage in that way with newcomers, with refugees, sometimes we think it's all about me supporting them, teaching them, sharing with them. I have found that I usually get more than I give. The learning that comes from that really carries out into the rest of my life, and I think makes me a better human being, which is something we all aspire to. So as you sort of think about your mission and things that you want to do in your projects, I would say, based on some of my learnings here, be really clear on the purpose or mission. No matter the size or the scope of your project, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Why do you exist? For me, my purpose is to unlock the potential of people and build inclusive prosperity. So the work that I do, and I do many different things, is all really anchored by that. And I think about how can I advance that. Civic Action I talked about, and one of the things that I learned there is it really is an organization that's in the grassroots, but also the grass tops. So how do you bring in business? How do you bring in governments? How do you bring in other organizations as partners to collaborate with, to co-create with? And that too has been really critical. I've also been involved, of course, with many women's initiatives, and I tend to take an intersectionality lens with myself also having intersectionality as someone of South Asian origin, but of course there are many other intersectionalities: Indigenous peoples, people with disability, members of the LGBTQ community, and that tends to be where I focus with women, and constantly pushing for let's not think of women as a homogeneous group, and what do we need to do differently? And it would be remiss of me not to mention that, of course, the Supreme Court decision yesterday, Roe versus Wade, which I know is weighing heavily on many of us. I have a mid-20s daughter who is very sad, as I am, of course, but you know, I've had a chance to have many conversations with her. And really, it's up to all of us that feel, you know, and have a position around women having reproductive rights and human rights overall, to use our platforms to talk about it and do whatever feels right to us, because this is a really important issue that goes beyond this immediate decision that in and of itself has significant impact. So let me close now with just sort of capturing some of the takeaways that I hope came through. The first one is dream big, dream bigger, dream biggest, and then take action to get there. Some of the actions: go outside your comfort zone, try new things, new people, always be learning. Learning is not an event. You're here today because you want to learn. So you are already naturally learners. Just build it into the flow of life. Invest in it, make it lifelong. Leadership is not a title. People often say, oh, if I had that title, if I was a leader, I could do it. Leadership is behaviors, it's actions. Just do it. Build partnerships and co-create with other organizations. Be inclusive yourself. Speak up for inclusion. There's no such thing as an innocent bystander. If you see something wrong, do something as long as it's safe. And finally, I will close with: take care of your own well-being and health. Put your oxygen mask on first. This is a long game. Thank you so much, Plan, for the opportunity to speak. And I would love to hear from you. I know we don't have that opportunity here. Please join me on LinkedIn. I'm very active, and we'll also be posting on this event. But connect with me, chat with me, tell me what resonated with you, tell me what didn't, because as I said earlier, for me, it's all about learning and getting better and having more impact. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Zabeen, for sharing those insights. Like Zabeen said, you can connect with her on LinkedIn, where you can learn more through her posts. She also loves to learn about your own takeaways and the impact that you have in your community as well. So please feel free to reach out on that platform. So before we delve deeper into what the refugee crisis is and who it impacts, we'd like to start by asking you a question. So how many refugees do you think there are in the world? Feel free to type your answer in the chat. This is really just an opportunity to get the conversation going and give you the chance to share your own knowledge on the topic. Okay, I see a couple of responses coming in. So maybe 3 to 4 million. Somebody said 1 million. Okay, another person said over 100 million. I'll give it maybe one more second. Okay. So most of you said between 1 to 3 million, but the answer is actually 28. So according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, it's estimated that there are 100 million forcibly displaced people in the world today, almost half of which are children, and 28 million actually hold refugee status. So in fact, in the last decade, the global refugee population has more than doubled, and there are more people on the move right now than ever before. So you may have already noticed from earlier conversations or just by looking at this slide that there are many different terms to describe people who have fled their homes for one reason or another. And using these terms properly is important in advancing an informed conversation on the topic and in capturing people's experiences accurately and respectfully. So let's get into some of those definitions. What do we mean when we say someone has been forcibly displaced, or when we talk about the global displaced population? A displaced person is someone who was compelled to leave their home due to conflict, persecution, human rights violations, or environmental disasters. Most often, we use the term displaced to refer to people who have been forced from their homes, but who haven't crossed international borders. So we also call them internally displaced people, or IDPs for short. In contrast, the term refugee applies to those who have crossed national boundaries to resettle somewhere safer, and often it's in a country neighboring their own. Another very important difference between the two terms is that refugee is a legal definition that specifically refers to people who have proved that they have well-founded fears of being persecuted in their home country if they were to return. So refugees are people who are protected under international law. Lastly, the term asylum seeker designates people who have applied for refugee status and are waiting for their claim to be approved in order to receive that protection and legally resettle. There's another important term that isn't included on the slide here because we didn't want to overwhelm you with information, but it's still necessary to be aware of, and the term is stateless people. So a stateless person is someone who doesn't have a nationality or citizenship in any country across the world. And this can occur for several reasons, including discrimination against a particular ethnic group or religious group. It could also be on the basis of gender, or it could be due to the emergence of a new state or changes in borders. So for example, when the Soviet Union dissolved, many individuals became stateless. But regardless of the reasons that lead to statelessness, it has very serious consequences for the people affected by it. So when people are denied a nationality, they often aren't allowed to go to school or see a doctor or open a bank account, for example. And they can even have difficulties in applying for refugee status. So it's important to keep stateless individuals in mind when speaking about refugees and persecuted groups of people. So now that we've clarified some of those definitions, we can start to gain a deeper understanding of the drivers of the refugee crisis, first by looking at the top countries that refugees usually come from. So you can see on this map here, in 2021, over half of the world's refugees came from only 3 countries: Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan, in that order. So the crises in these countries vary in their causes and natures. People are fleeing political persecution and other acute threats like barrel bombs in Syria, hyperinflation in Venezuela. And in some cases, the instability in these countries has been exacerbated, if not largely caused, by Western intervention, particularly when we look at the impact of the Bush administration's global war on terror on a country like Afghanistan, among many others. So despite this, there are still commonalities between these countries. So for one, civilians often bear the brunt of the suffering, whether they're deliberately targeted or whether they're collateral damage. They tend to be the first victims of these crises. Another reality is that the international institutions responsible for maintaining peace and security, like the UN Security Council, for instance, have repeatedly failed to prevent and resolve conflicts that have led to the major refugee crises that we've seen in the last few decades and that we're continuing to witness today. Ultimately, it's a combination of many factors that can help explain the magnitude of forced displacement. So firstly, like I briefly mentioned, these crises are the result of complex socio-historical circumstances. Secondly, the organizations in charge of ensuring the peace are often limited in the tools at their disposal to address these issues. And finally, there's also the reality that these same organizations yield to the pressures of the world's major powers, who have a right to veto any resolution that they bring forward. So moving on to the next part of the question, where do refugees tend to go when they're forced out of their homes? As you can see from this map, the top 3 countries who have accepted the greatest number of refugees are Turkey, Colombia, and Uganda. And so you can see that people generally seek safety in countries neighboring their own. People who fled Syria and Venezuela, for instance, have by and large settled in Turkey and Colombia. On the other hand, Uganda hosts most of the refugees from sub-Saharan Africa who have fled the crises in South Sudan and Somalia, for example, just to name a few. So there are different reasons why people settle in countries adjacent to their own. One is that they're geographically accessible, which of course is very important for those urgently trying to escape a dangerous situation. Second is that many hope to return to their countries of origin once the crisis comes to an end. And another reason is that many other countries, particularly wealthier nations, have very restrictive refugee and migration policies. So in fact, the UNHCR estimates that only 16% of the world's refugees are hosted by rich nations. So I'm aware those may feel like a lot of numbers. It may seem a bit overwhelming, but know that that's okay. Being a youth advocate means being okay to learn new things and challenge pre-existing thoughts. So beyond these key facts, it's important to reflect on our own preconceptions of who refugees are. So I'd like to ask you all to share what comes to mind when you hear the word refugee. And so you can follow the link on the slide here and type in the code to put in your answer. So it's okay if you feel removed from the topic and don't really know where to start, but I'm sure that many of you know immigrants, for example, or even are immigrants yourselves. Maybe you know someone who has moved to Canada to pursue a better quality of life, even if they don't hold refugee status specifically. So if that's the case, I encourage you to think about them instead and what words come to mind when you picture them. So I hope everyone can see the words that are starting to come up here. So people are saying lost identity, strong and brave. Lost is coming back up again. Resilient, driven. Brave. Okay, maybe I'll give it a few more seconds for everybody to share their thoughts. Everyone's responsibility, yes. Okay, so there are many different words here. A lot of really positive ones too. I'm seeing resilient and brave, and I think this word cloud is really amazing because it reflects the fact that refugees are a very diverse group of people actually, and their identities are far more complicated than their legal status. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Sorry. So one way in which we can account for the complex social realities of refugees, as everyone has made clear, is to apply what we call an intersectional perspective to their experiences. So intersectionality refers to the idea that we all have multiple identities that intersect to make us who we are. More than that, it gives us a way to talk about oppressions and privileges that overlap and reinforce each other. So the term dates back to the 1980s. It was coined by a legal scholar. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was looking for a more effective approach to study how Black American women's experiences are distinctly different than those of both Black men and of white women. And this is because Black women endure both gender discrimination and racial discrimination. But over the last few decades, scholars, activists, and policymakers have expanded the use of intersectionality to talk about identities beyond race and gender. So first, let's talk about how intersectionality can be helpful in talking about issues relevant to Canada specifically. So in Canada, where we have very explicit policies for assimilation and integration of refugees, intersectionality can help us understand how this multiculturalism is done to the exclusion of the country's own internally displaced people, namely the many Indigenous communities that continue to experience disproportionate levels of poverty and violence as a result of colonization. Canada has a record of failure to honor the United Nations human rights covenants and conventions in its treatment of Indigenous groups by uprooting these peoples from their lands and denying them due process, even under Canadian law. In addition to that, the immigrant and refugee sector has made little to no attempt to create meaningful linkages with Canada's First Nation communities, and many of the policies that non-Aboriginal Canadians benefit from, including myself, and including immigrants and refugees, is directly to the detriment of Indigenous peoples. So this is an instance where applying the concept of intersectionality can help us address the similarities between refugees and Indigenous peoples who often have similar colonization and settlement backgrounds, but whose experience of oppression and privilege in Canada can be vastly different. So now back to the broader picture of the refugee crisis, intersectionality can contribute to revealing the systemic discrimination in refugee and migration systems. It points to disparities in accessing durable solutions, and it helps us challenge rigid labels and categories. So for example, let's look at stories from two different refugee families that have had radically different migrant trajectories. So you'll see on this slide here a picture of Salma and her family. So at the time the story was written, Salma was 29 years old. She fled the war in Syria in 2015 with her sister and two young children. So she walked for 1,500 miles across Turkey, Greece, Macedonia, and Serbia before finally reaching Germany, which was her final destination. And depending on where she was forced to alter her appearance for safety reasons. So if she was in government-held territories, she shared that she had to wear makeup and remove her hijab in order not to be tied to religious fundamentalists and maybe to get a chance to actually enter a country. And when she was moving through rebel-held territories, she had to cover up, and she had to find allies who were men to speak for her so she wouldn't ruffle any feathers. Also, she was held at numerous refugee camps where living conditions were so dire, she often had to pay her way out. And that's how eventually she made it to Germany. Another story that we have is the one of Vadim, who fled the war in Ukraine just a couple months ago with his wife, his 3 sons, and his father-in-law. So Vadim drove 2 days to get to the Polish border and crossed without problems. This is in his own words. And after a short stay in Poland, where they were offered accommodation and food, they drove 600 miles to Prague in the Czech Republic. So right now they're settled in a house with 2 other refugee families, and Vadim's children were able to pursue remote learning. Vadim receives a small stipend from the government, and full transparency, it's very small. It's less than $500 for his entire family until him and his wife are able to support themselves financially. And just for additional context, the EU right now has granted temporary protection to all refugees from Ukraine. So that includes residency rights, medical care, access to the labor market, among other benefits. So based on these 2 stories, we want to hear from you in the audience. Why do you think Salma and Vadim had such different refugee journeys and resettlement experiences? So please, again, feel free to use the chat and share your ideas on what factors could have influenced their trajectories. the countries they came from. Okay, that's one factor, definitely. The color of their skin. Honestly, feel free to be spontaneous with your answer. Anything that could have led to the different response in countries hosting these refugees. Race, religion, and gender, language, these are all very good examples. Exactly. Okay, so there are many different ideas that people have included in the chat, and they're all very relevant to why they've had such different experiences. Oh, there's another response that says that Ukrainian refugees were seen as more similar to their own population. Okay, so I think we have a lot of answers, and I think everyone here understands the bigger picture, which is that identity and the many identities that we hold and that refugees hold plays a huge part in shaping their experiences and their trajectories from their homeland and to wherever they resettle. So intersectionality in this case has become a tool to identify the multiple forms of discrimination a person can face, which is all the more crucial in the context of very vulnerable groups like refugees. So using this approach for policy development and advocacy efforts allows for targeted decision-making that fully includes those at the margins and people who aren't necessarily from European countries or people who we think we can relate to in any way. So thank you for sharing all of those answers. Okay, so to wrap up this discussion, here are some of the key takeaways that you'll all hopefully keep in mind in general, but also for the trivia portion of the summit that will take place later this afternoon. So one is that there are more people on the move now than ever before, as I was mentioning earlier. Second is the definition of a refugee, which is a specific designation and a legal status that applies to people outside of their home country who are unable to return for a variety of reasons. The third point is that most of the world's refugees are hosted in countries adjacent to their own, and that rich nations only host 16% of the world's refugees. And finally is the fact that refugees are a diverse group of people who have many identities beyond their legal status, and that their experiences are shaped by race, class, gender, age, disability, and as many of you mentioned, language, nationality, religion, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much, everyone, for bearing with me. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully we're all better for it and can take more meaningful action in solidarity with refugees and other displaced people. So now on to our amazing panel. We're so incredibly lucky to be joined by three remarkable leaders who will each be speaking to the importance of bringing to the refugee crisis in different ways. Before we jump in, everyone in the audience, be sure to ask questions in the chat box, as I'll be selecting 3 questions after the dialogue for each of the guests. So please don't forget to use the chat box. Okay, let's jump in. Folks, so I would love for each of you to share a brief introduction about yourselves. MP Kayabaga, we'd love to start with you, followed by Aya, and then Siyabulela, please.
Can you hear me, Ayan?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to join this amazing panel and just this very relevant conversation right now in the world. And it has been for many years, but I think now more than ever, the alarms need to be sounding from everywhere. So my name is Arielle Kayabaga, and I'm a member of Parliament for London West, which is situated on Treaty 6, which is the traditional territory for the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Chippewas of the First Dance. Prior to me being a member of Parliament, I was a city councillor in London, Ontario. I was elected in 2008. And before I got into politics, I was involved in different initiatives that had to do with refugee settlement in the City of London, and around climate change as well. So these are really important topics that I'm very passionate about. And today I'm happy to join Plan International Youth Council to hear your thoughts and ideas on how we can address this global inequity, but most importantly, to also acknowledge and honor refugees. Refugees are humans. What makes you a refugee is not something that you do, is not something that is part of your your character or how people should view you as a person. I think people should see refugees as regular humans. Refugee is a temporary status that we all experience at some point in life due to different situations that are happening in the country. I was once a refugee, so I carry the refugee status quite close to my heart, but I also know that being a refugee doesn't define me, and it's a part of who I've been and where I've walked, and it actually enriches my life, and it makes me a better person in this world. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy to join this conversation.
Thank you. Aya, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Aya. I'm from Syria. I'm a newcomer to Canada myself. I arrived in 2021. For a huge part of my life, I was a refugee in China from Syria. I'm an artist. When I have words, I write poetry, and when I don't, I paint. I'm currently studying sociology at Toronto Metropolitan University. I work at Costi Immigrant Services. I'm also a migration research project assistant at the university. I'm very honored to be here with you all today to discuss what does being a refugee really means on a personal level. And yeah, I'm so excited to be here with you along with my inspiring fellow speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you too. And Siyabulela, we'd love to hear from you as well. Oh, I think you. Yeah, I think you might be muted.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ian, and it's such an honor and a privilege to join my fellow panelists. MP, I see you. I see you as well. And I would like to extend my gratitudes to the audience and to also Plan International Canada for providing us with such a platform to discuss such pertinent and critical issues as it pertains to refugee and the refugee crisis in the world. And of course, I am one that comes from a background of peace and conflict resolution. I studied my master's and Ph.D. focusing on South Africa's role in peace and conflict resolution within the African continent. And of course, my interests were informed by the realities of South Africa's history insofar as our battle against the apartheid regime and the impact of that in the people of South Africa and the rest of the African continent. And of course, I am currently working as a regional project manager at Journalists for Human Rights, which is one of Canada's probably largest international media development organization that works in an intersection between human rights, advocacy, and media development. I was also previously the country director for Journalists for Human Rights in South Sudan, where we're focusing on strengthening media and supporting the peace process in South Sudan. And it's such a privilege to be working now in a platform like Plan International. I was one that was also privileged to be at close proximity at observing some of their work in South Sudan, and they're doing amazing work. So I'm looking forward to such a wonderful discussion together with my fellow colleagues in the panel. Thank you very much, Aya.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all for sharing. MP Kayabaga, I would like to start by asking you a more specific question. So today in Canada, the private sponsorship system accounts for over 50% of resettled refugee arrivals. And for those in the audience who aren't familiar with what that is, it refers to the resettlement of a refugee where costs and settlement support are provided by private groups or private organizations. So although this system is an excellent vehicle in addition to government sponsorship, because one, it increases the number of people who are admitted into the country, two, it also allows for many Canadians to have a stake in the resettlement process. At the same time, it turns what should be a government benefit into a private gift. So apologies for the long-winded question, but how do you think we can improve our refugee policy for the government to take more responsibility in the resettlement process as opposed to relying on individual benevolence?
Yeah, so private, and thank you for your question. Private sponsorship of refugees has been a good way, a good option for Canadians who want to play an active role in the resettlement process, as it allows people, a lot of people, to be resettled into our country. This is in addition to many more resettled refugees that have come through our different Canadian programs that we have. And basically, to answer your question, the refugee policy continues to be a work in progress that requires the government to be adaptable and take the necessary measures to the different world crises that have displaced a lot of people. If you look at the numbers of people who are displaced right now, it's high. And now we have the war in Ukraine and the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. So, for example, if, as we speak, Canada has welcomed more than 16,000 refugees from the Afghanistan crisis since August of 2021, and we're still working to resettle at least 40,000 Afghan refugees as quickly and as safely as possible. But we also have the Ukrainian crisis as well that we have committed to helping resettle people, and other crises that we're dealing with as well. This has been achieved because we put all hands on deck to bring in the necessary resources on grounds, to process thousands of applications, to invest more money in hiring more visa officers who can process visas. And I think that this is something that we should keep in our refugee policies as a toolbox in order to ensure that our government can have a response to refugee crises around the world, and that our approach is consistent and that plays a key role in how we resettle people through different programs. It is not a perfect plan. We're always happy to hear what people who experience these programs, what feedback they give us. But our goal is to play a role, a leading role, to support refugees. I spoke in the House just recently on World Refugee Day, and I did talk about how Canada is the leading country in the world right now in resettling refugees. So again, there's always things that we can learn. There's always room for improvement, but our goal is to make sure that we keep this as an urgency and we keep this as part of our values, our core values as a country, that supporting people who are fleeing a war, displaced people, supporting refugees is one of our most important work that we do as a country, and is a huge priority for us.
So thank you for your response. Aya, we're so grateful to have you here too, sharing your story so openly and bravely. So we'd love to hear your perspective on the refugee crisis, because it's so unique as it reflects your lived experience. So how has being from Syria, a country that we know has been devastated by war. How has that influenced your upbringing and your idea of identity?
Thank you very much for providing me with the platform to share that. Where do you come from is probably the question that I dreaded the most for a very long time. How do you define your sense of belonging when you're a reflection of all the warmth and coldness you have ever felt, all the destruction and death you have witnessed, every book you have read, every song you danced along to, every place you have been, and everyone you've ever loved that you've had to leave behind while seeking a safer future to call home? There's really no easy answer for that. I'm hoping that by sharing a bit about what I went through, that perhaps we can maybe find an answer to that suits everyone, to their own unique experiences. I have a distant memory of me standing on the rooftop in our small village in the city of Homs, Syria, reading poems from the forbidden Nizar Qabbani, a Syrian poet that I took from my cousin. And his forbidden poems were my introduction to love and an abstract sense of freedom that I breathed through my lungs as I read them to the wind. I was yet to know what love or freedom meant, but my soul craved both in ways that I couldn't describe. That feeling would follow me for years to come. My upbringing was a struggle between two cultures, one trying to claim me as their own and the other pushing me away no matter how hard I tried to belong. I decided to take that which I valued the most from both and settled for a new version of myself, experiencing a breed of third culture that was uniquely defined by me. In the turbulent journey of my life, I hid in books. I always heard stories about different parts of the world, saw pictures online in the movies. Though my life was very limited as a refugee, I experienced that precious magic the world has to offer through the pages that I read, where I traveled through space and time. I found the strength I needed in myself to pull myself out of very difficult situations. It wasn't given to me, that power and strength. I had to claim them for my own. There are two sides to every coin. My culture taught me to be kind to others and offer help when I could, yet the very same culture tried to strip me naked of my voice and bury me in an image that looked nothing like me. And maybe it was the books I read or the art I made, but somewhere along the line, I discovered power in speaking up. Education emancipated me from the cages of cultural ignorance. It enabled me to challenge the patriarchy, challenge unfair expectations, and be true to myself. How great it would be for me to use all my struggles and experiences to help other young people find their voices and empower themselves. Actually, to end this on a happy note, Anne Frank once noted how wonderful it would be for that nobody needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. And I just could not agree more with that sentiment. Thank you again, Ayan.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was very beautifully put. And I'm excited to hear more about your art later during our conversation. Similarly, Siyabulela, you are incredibly passionate about conflict, peace, and you worked a lot on refugee crises, especially with your time in Sudan. So we'd love to hear more about your journey on this specific issue, please.
Thank you very much, Ayan. Greetings to our audience and our panelists once again. I think for me, it is of critical importance to probably problematize the question of refugee and ask a question and probably pose maybe a problematic statement to argue that one way or another, we are probably all refugees, or we were once refugees at some point in our history. And I would like to introduce, maybe some of you know the story of South Africa, but I would like to give a brief history of where we come from. You would understand that South Africa is one of the countries that found itself in its history in a very difficult and a very violent position during the apartheid regime. And during the apartheid regime, many of my people, when they were denied their right to self-determination, and when they were denied their right to vote solely because of the color of their skin and because of who they are, many of them, while they were fighting for liberation, while they were fighting against the injustices of the apartheid regime and the violence of the apartheid regime, many of them had to flee and they had to seek safe haven in countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. And during that time, it was the most difficult time because at that time our forefathers were fighting for our liberation and they were fighting for the future of the generations yet to come. And they were fighting for the future of my generation. And many of them had to be in exile in countries such as Tanzania, Uganda, Mozambique. And they were welcomed by these countries because they understood one thing. They understood that we were fighting for the right to self-determination. We were fighting for the right to be respected as equal members of the human family. And of course, fast forward the story later, South Africa experienced its democratic dispensation in 1994, and Nelson Mandela was elected as the first Black president of South Africa. And many South Africans were fled in the 1960s and the 1980s. The violence of the apartheid regime were now beginning to come back to South Africa and beginning to come back to participate in the reconciliation process in South Africa and to participate in the reconstruction and rebuilding of South Africa from the history of violence and apartheid under the apartheid regime and under the British colonial system in the country. And fast forward years later, the countries that were that were stable in the 1960s and in the 1980s, countries like such as Zimbabwe, countries such as Mozambique, and countries such as Tanzania, and other countries in Southern Africa who harbored us and protected our people during the apartheid system, were now in need of our assistance as South Africa. South Africa was now a free nation. South Africa was now a democratic state. South Africa was now a relatively stable country economically, as opposed to the countries that harbored the refugees and the political leaders that ran away from the persecution and from the violence of the apartheid system. Now, for me, when I look at the concept of refugee, and I say, when I make a statement that perhaps we were all refugees one way or another in our history, it is informed by the fact that my people, under running away from the injustices and the violence of the apartheid system and the British colonial system in South Africa, were harbored by countries such as Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and we were refugees in the 1960s and the 1980s. And now when we experience and realize the dawn of democratic dispensation in 1994, it was now our turn as South Africa to harbor many of refugees who were running away from Zimbabwe, who were running away from Mozambique, who were running away from Tanzania and other countries in Southern Africa, informed by many factors, the instabilities from their government, the authoritarian regimes, that style of leadership that was used by their governments, that in fact in the 1960s, in the 1980s, these countries were more stable, these countries were more democratic. It was now our turn to give the same, to extend the same courtesy, to extend the same protection to these countries that protected our people. The likes of Nelson Mandela, for instance, was allowed to travel through Tanzania, through Uganda, through Zimbabwe, through Kenya, through Ethiopia, through Algeria, under the apartheid system without even carrying a passport. And one thing that those governments understood was that Nelson Mandela and his generation were fighting for the liberation and of their own people, were fighting for self-determination. They were running away from their own countries, not because they wanted to leave South Africa. They were running away because there were push factors that forced them to leave their own countries to seek safe haven in other countries. And when I look at it today, it is near impossible to realize or to experience what Nelson Mandela and his generation experienced in the 1980s and the 1990s, where they were allowed to travel across different parts of Africa and to even reach countries such as China and Russia without even carrying a legitimate passport, because they were seeking safe haven. And there is one thing that I think is surprising me about the behavior and the attitude of leaders at that point in time vis-a-vis the attitude and the behavior of leaders today. Then they understood that many of the people were either running away from war or they were running from various factors that pushed them away from their own nation. And they gave them safe haven and they gave them protection. And for me, I owe my freedoms and I owe the limited rights and freedoms that I'm enjoying today to the courtesy given by those countries, to the courtesy given by the countries and the leaders who allowed my people, when they were running away from conflict, when they were running away from violence of apartheid, to give them safe haven and protection so that they can regroup and relaunch their struggle for a free and a democratic South Africa. And indeed, free and a democratic South Africa was realized, and an opportunity was given to us to rebuild our nation. And we, to a certain degree, managed to rebuild our nation. And today, South Africa is one of those countries in Southern Africa that is harboring refugees from the very same countries that protected us when we were going through our own violent history and our own violent conflict. It is for that reason, even me as an individual, as a peace and human rights activist, with our work in South Sudan, for instance, I find it so easy for me to leave my safe comfort in South Africa and participate in a peace process and in project that seeks to bring about peace and reconstruction in countries such as South Sudan, for instance. It is because I know that these very same countries that are today in conflict, they're the very same countries that stood with us and stood with our people when we were going through crisis. These are the countries that did not close their doors on us when we were in crisis. So that is what informs me as an individual, as a peace and a human rights activist. That's what strengthens me. That's what drives me to do this work. That's what drives me to say, I would leave my free and democratic nation and I'll go into a civil war in South Sudan and participate in a process that seeks to bring about peace and participate in a process that seeks to bring about reconstruction and participate in a process that seeks to bring about an end to violence in a country such as South Sudan. And lastly, it is for that reason that I work in organizations such as Journalists for Human Rights that have been actively involved in the evacuation of families and human rights and human rights defenders and journalists from Afghanistan. We have probably supported over 2,000 refugees and recycled over 2,000 refugees from Afghanistan here in Canada, supported by the Veterans Group and other individuals who understand the plight of those who are finding themselves in conflict and in a refugee crisis today. So those are some of my submissions, and hopefully I'll be able to expand to some of these points later on in the discussion. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those very important points that we all have a responsibility in accepting and welcoming people who have been victimized by persecution and conflict, not just because it could happen to us, but because it's the right thing to do and to build empathy beyond our own lived experiences. So thank you, Siyabulela, for those points. You spoke about reconciliation, and MP Kayabaga, I have a question for you along those lines. Based on your experiences leaving your homeland, how do you think that we can enact solidarity between displaced people in critical need of refuge from Rwanda, from Syria, from other places, and dispossessed people here in Canada, the many Indigenous communities that we've spoken about during this conversation. So how can we enact that solidarity while still asserting Indigenous self-determination?
Yeah, I just want to start by talking about the beautiful stories that both Siyabulela and Aya just shared. It's really uplifting to hear, you know, how we all live through our journeys as refugees. And I am really inspired by everything you said, how you use words and you use the beauty of the world to sustain yourself and to live an experience that you're not physically living and your physical environment is not allowing you to experience, but you're experiencing in other ways. And you're truly an artist. That is something that truly can be achieved by artists. And I think that to me was really beautiful, because I think I used to get asked all the time, when I lived through the war, how I survived it and what are the things that I clung to. And for me, I never thought of art the way you think about art, but I found laughter and joy in different things. And I think it's the similar way of coping with being a refugee and living through, you know, situations that force us to grow up quickly and to think about the world in ways that, you know, most other children do not have to. And I also find what Siyabulela said really, really beautiful, and the connection between, you know, supporting one another through crises and understanding that it is our collective responsibility to care for each other when we're going through these situations, and not just experience it as just you, but, you know, South Africa being able to now support other countries that, you know, go through these crises. I think he also, you know, didn't mention how South Africa also supported Jewish people when they're fleeing from, you know, Europe. So there's interconnections in how, once you've experienced something so harsh, and the compassion that you bring to the world, and the difference that it really makes, because the reason why we go into wars in the first place is because we can't feel what the other person is feeling, and we can't. That humanity is lost, and I truly believe that refugee children are the ones who can impact and change the world, because they've lived the worst situations and are still willing to give out themselves in a very tangible way, and through art, through music, through different work that they do to contribute to the world. So your question, Ayan, around how all of that is connected through, you know, understanding and supporting the Indigenous community. I think Indigenous communities have a lot in common with displaced people and refugees. We share a common struggle, which is having to depart our land, having to lose the land ownership, and migrating into other places, and having to fight for the right for our existence and our autonomy as a people. So I think there is definitely you know, a lot of work that could be done. I think refugees, for one, should inform themselves on the land that they come into when they come to Canada, and understand who has been preserving the climate, the land, the food security, and who's been here before. And as we settle into this land, we have to, it's our responsibility as well to learn of the past and of the present. Otherwise, we're going to be taught a very limited history that does not allow us to provide that same solidarity that Siyabulela was talking about between, you know, other countries that may need support in after we go through our storms. Refugees, when they flee their homes, they don't really get the chance to carry much with them. They take their knowledge, their culture, their resilience, and that's what they infuse in these communities that they settle into. And that makes us a richer country for having, Aya's culture into, mixed with Siyabulela's culture, mixed with my culture, mixed with your culture, Ayan, and many other cultures, is what makes us stronger. But what can make it even stronger is understanding and respecting and honoring the treaties that were signed, and supporting the fight for autonomy for the indigenous communities and the indigenous peoples of this land. I would say that cultural harmony is the essence of collaboration, and it is time not to force cultural homogeneity, and let people determine how to practice their own culture and how to integrate and take the time that they need to integrate into what this new large makeup of culture would looks like now, and would continue to look like, and being open and accepting. And our government believes that there's much more work to do for the indigenous communities and refugees. And we generally believe that their presence is what makes us stronger as a country, and what makes the diversity more rich. I do have to mention, though, that I have to head out. I have really enjoyed chatting with all of you and hearing your stories. It has really uplifted my spirit to hear the different experiences, and then how people live them as well. It's really important to hear how people live their own journeys, and it's powerful. I'm very impacted by your story. I'm very impacted by Siyabulela's story, and I really hope that we get an opportunity to connect again and to continue to share. But one thing I'll leave in this room is, I said earlier that being a refugee is not who you are. It's a status, it's a passage, it's a journey. It's something that is part of your life, part of your journey, but not exactly who you are. But I'll say this, and I really stand by these words because I've said them so many times. Had I never been a refugee, I don't think I would be the woman I am today. I became a mother at a really young age, and I like to think I've been a really great mom, but I don't think I would have been that mom to my son had I not experienced what I experienced. I don't know what my life would be like if I did not go through the journey that I went through. I don't want that journey for myself. I don't want that journey for other Burundian kids to be displaced from their homeland. However, I think that people need to begin to see the strength and the resiliency and the power and the beauty and the softness as well that we bring to the table, because Aya's story is so soft and so beautiful. And I think sometimes we think like people who have gone through hardship, they become hard and they become fighters and we're ready to, break the system and fight the patriarchy. But sometimes we can challenge the patriarchy in a very soft way. And I think, everybody, again, lives this experience very differently. I truly am inspired by all of your stories and how you live your story and how you experience your story. And your story is powerful in its own way. It doesn't have to look like someone else's story. It doesn't have to look like that person that you look up to for it to be valid. You have been displaced. You have like 1,000 years on your life right now, more than any other person who's never been displaced. And that's powerful, and that's rich, and that's knowledge that all of us need, that our country needs. Every single person in Canada, their lives is better because you're part of it. Their lives is enriched because you're part of it. And wherever you've been displaced to, that community, their lives is better because you're there. Their lives is better because you have brought yourself and your knowledge and your resilience and the little that you were able to take with you, and you're putting it in that community, and you're contributing to that community, and you're impacting and changing everyday people's lives. And that's powerful. That's powerful. And I hope this is the message I feel like I want to leave with you guys as I have to head out. But I want you to know that I take these words as well and walk away with them feeling very impacted and changed by this conversation we've had today. And thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to share my story with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time and for sharing those insights. Okay. So I'll move on to Aya now, since MP Kayabaga has to leave us. But Aya, how can youth in Canada best support folks transition to a new country? based on your experience in China and now in Canada. Feel free to speak about those personal experiences and what you found helpful in assimilating to Canadian culture, and maybe what you wish you had as well.
Thank you very much. Again, that was a very, very powerful speech that MP gave us, and my heart is fluttering, so I was taking a moment to calm down. I'd like to give some context on top of what MP said. When you've had to pick up your entire life and fit it into a small suitcase, or sometimes not even a suitcase, just running for your life, having to leave everything you ever knew and cherished behind, you're scared and defenseless. When a newcomer arrives in Canada, they're faced with so much that is unknown to them, which is terrifying. It takes time to let your guard down and to start to learn, what does it feel like to be safe, to be in peace? This is so strange. They need access to language support, access to healthcare, education, employment, and most importantly, access to mental health assessment and services. So how do we provide support? I think the first step would be to show kindness. The warmth of human love and generosity transcends across cultures and languages. I was very lucky that I spoke fluent English upon my arrival in Canada, and the way that my experiences shaped me has helped me greatly to adapt. Like MP said, I immediately started looking at services available to newcomers, among which was the Youth Changemakers program run by COSTI and the Toronto Youth Job Corps that was offered by the City of Toronto. The first offered me a safe space to connect with like-minded youth who are passionate about making change. And the second really provided me with the training that made me better equipped to seek employment in Toronto. A lot of newcomers may face language barriers and cultural misunderstandings and miscommunications. It takes a lot of energy to take initiative. In addition to the parental struggles and responsibilities that many newcomers have to face, the youth and children in those families require special care and attention. I think the youth need to be provided with safe spaces and services such as the ones that I was provided with, where they feel comfortable expressing themselves through various forms of art in order to help them deconstruct the weight of the journey they have been through that they may not be aware of themselves yet. The presence of such services and support also helps them feel more confident in their own skin, which would hopefully encourage communication with others around them and integration into society. This is really about assisting youth to heal from the traumas of their past. It's only by healing that they can unlearn all the fears and anxieties that they grew up with. Unfortunately, for refugees, peace is an abstract concept that has to be learned because it just wasn't there when we were growing up. It wasn't there when we were learning how to go on with our lives. Newcomer youth and children are young buds that were removed before flowering and replanted into foreign soil. I think feeling safe enough to express themselves is a vital step in assisting them to grow into confident young adults who bring their unique perspectives and talents to the shaping of this country that is Canada. So, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Aya. And Siyabulela, just to add on to that as well, in your view, what is the role of youth in advocating for peace and human rights, especially in the context of the refugee crisis?
Thank you very much, Ian. I think as young people, we need to understand that we have a collective responsibility to first and foremost define how we want both our present and our future to be. And in the process of defining that, we have a responsibility to begin as youth to take up space. It is our responsibility to make sure that we are in the decision-making processes and we are in the table when decisions are made about our present and about our future. There cannot be, and I say this again, there cannot be a discussion about us and about our future without us in that particular table. We must begin to start taking space, and it is our responsibility to then define how our future would look like. When I look back at the generations that came before us, I have observed throughout history that there were moments where they took a collective will and power to change the tide of their own history, to redefine how their future is going to look like. And I was narrating the story of South Africa and what South Africa went through and the assistance of other countries to South Africa. And now South Africa assisting the very same countries that were in a position to assist us when we are going through our own violence and our own crisis, when we and or our people were being refugees into other countries. I realized that that particular decision took a collective responsibility to say they are going to define how their present and how their future is going to look like. And they redefine how that future look like. And today, I am living in the world or in a country that is to a certain degree stable. I'm living in a country that is democratic because the generation, the young people of that time decided that they are not going to allow us as this generation to experience the same injustices, the same violence, the same crisis under colonialism and under apartheid in South Africa. So I say, and I submit this to our generation, and I submit this to the youth. We have a collective responsibility to define what our purpose is as this generation, and we have a collective responsibility to come together as young people to redefine how we want our present and how our future to look like. And it is in our hands as this youth, as this generation, to take a stand on the issue of refugees and various crises that are currently happening today in the world, because these are the very same crises that are going to define how our future as this generation is going to look like. So if we refuse, for instance, to be part and parcel of decision making, if you refuse to be in the table where decisions are being made, if we refuse to take up an opportunity and have a voice as young people, we would, years from now, will be questioned by the generations yet to come as to say, what did we do about the refugee crisis, for instance, or the conflict in Syria, the conflict in Afghanistan, the conflict in the Tigray region in Ethiopia, for instance, the recent conflict in Ukraine. The generations yet to come are going to ask us, what did we do? And I'll say one thing, I think, which is in a more positive note, Aya and Ian and the fellow colleagues. I'm currently speaking from somewhere in a location in Toronto. And I was so much, my heart was filled with joy and jubilee when I visited our head office here in Toronto, and to observe the staff profile of our organization. And I'm sure this is the reflection in other organizations as well. Within our staff force, we have individuals from Jordan, from Turkey, from Syria, from South Sudan, and other, mostly from Pakistan. Mostly these are countries that are currently experiencing crisis. And that is to say to me, the fact that these individuals who are now part and parcel of our team here in Toronto, servicing all other countries that are going through crisis, the fact that they are refugees doesn't necessarily mean these are people that had no skills. These were people that did not have life before. Many of them, for instance, I'll make an example of my fellow colleague, Zain. Zain is from Syria. Zain, by training, is a lawyer, and he's now heading our international relations department at Journalists for Human Rights. His dream was to practice law in Syria and not to practice in Canada today. But today he's participating in the process of resolving some of the world's most problematic crises around the world, sitting as a refugee here in Canada. So this is to say to all of us that people are not refugees because they choose to be refugees. They had lives in their own countries before. Many of them started to be doctors. Many of them started to be lawyers, economists. You can name all the skills that exist in the world, but they were denied that opportunity because of the injustices and the conflict and all other factors that made them to be refugees today. So as this generation, as Canadians, I'm not Canadian, but I'll plead to young people in Canada to consider that as much as they might not be refugees today, we do not know what the future holds. And this is not to hope that something would happen, something bad would happen in the future for the people here in Canada. But we do not know, we know not what the future holds. The same way Ukraine did not know 2 years ago that they would find themselves in the most desperate and problematic position or condition of war today, is the same way that many people from different countries, running away from different countries that are embattled in violence and that are embattled in a conflict of one nature to another, or even displaced by climate change. They did not know that they will find themselves in such a position. So we ought to find ways to sympathize and empathize to what others are going through. We ought to find ways to just be human. I mean, the question of love and empathy and sympathy is a question of us being human. Let's try to find ways to just be human. And also, let's take up space as young people and begin to define how our present and how our future should look like. So those are the words I will probably submit as I conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for those inspiring words. I think everyone in the audience has already taken a step in the right direction by joining this conversation and learning more about our duty to others and in making the world a better place. So thank you for that. This was such an incredible conversation. I'm really grateful to the two of you and to MP Kayabaga as well for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. And before we move on to the Q&A from the audience, I believe you wanted to leave us with a poem that beautifully wraps up the remarkable journey you bravely shared with us today. So before I hand it over to you, Aya, folks in the audience, please remember to submit any other questions that you would have before the final Q&A segment. And I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much. I was asked often, where does this hope come from? And I'd say, from you who was birthed at the touch of sunset and fell upon the ocean blues, you with the silky presence taming ancient fires, you with the eyes sparkling love inherited from those long gone, continuing to splash wonders with your glowing minds. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you, Aya. And now we have two questions from the audience now that MP has left. But once again, I just wanted to sincerely thank the three of you for being so open and encouraging as we speak to such an important and relevant topic. The work you're doing is very inspiring, and I'm sure the audience feels the same way. I'm sure you've seen the chat. So speaking of the audience, here are the questions that they have for you, and I'll start with you, Aya. So in your own opinion, how do you think sharing your individual experience of being a refugee has changed the way people understand what it means? And have you noticed a shift in the way people think about this based on what they've seen from you? And this is a question from Cedra. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly.
Yes, thank you very much, Sidra. That's a very good question. Yes, definitely. I think that there has been a shift after sharing my own story to people and how I have managed to find my own light and inspiration in myself Really, it's about the tools that you have within yourselves, which is, it can be art, reading, writing, sports, whatever it is, something that makes you, that's what makes a difference, is that there is this something about you that nobody else can do, that only you can do. And that's where the difference happens. That's what makes it unique to you. And I think that once people get to see that little thing about you, they can never look at the issue of refugees again, because you bring it back to life. You are presenting an authentic experience that is real and genuine. You're saying, I'm here, this is me in flesh and blood, these are my experiences, and I'm here sharing my heart with you, hoping that you would join me in order to come and make change happen together.
Amazing. Thank you, Aya. Siyabulela, I have a question from Rachel, who wonders what you think, or why you think some refugee journeys are more highlighted in the media than others.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel, for that question. And I think this speaks into the inequalities that exist in the world that we live in today. And it speaks into our inability as the human race to come together in unity against any forms of injustice or against any crisis. It speaks into the fact that there are those members of the human family who are considered to have a higher value than other members of the human family. I'll make reference, for instance, to the misfortune and the crisis in Ukraine. There's been a very quick and prompt response in the world, particularly from the first world countries, on the crisis in Ukraine, or the crisis that came as a result in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But there's been a very slow-paced response to the crisis of war in Syria, in Jordan, in the Tigray region, for instance, in Ethiopia. And you have probably observed also in the media, especially in the media from the first world countries in the Europe and the West in general, that there were sentiments such as, these are refugees. These are not like refugees from the Middle East or from Africa. These are refugees from Europe. These are middle-class Europeans. These, it speaks into that inequality in value among different members of the human family. And for me, these are some of the things that we need to critically engage on as young people. And these are some of the sentiments and attitudes that as young people, we have a responsibility to reject them by all means possible. We need to begin to hold those who share such ideas and sentiments to account on their inequality or their perception of the world view as a whole. So these are some of the reasons why, for me, we are having a lot of challenges in the world. These are some of the reasons why we find it even difficult to resolve some of the most simplest problems in the world, because of the inequalities among the members of the human family. So I think for me, I am more than asking the question of why do we think such attitudes and behaviors exist insofar as the inequalities of perceptions of different crises in the world. The questions that we must ask is, what are we doing as young people in critically questioning such sentiments, and in holding to account those who hold such problematic or polarizing views, instead of, because we already know the problems, we already know what the issues are. The question we should begin to ask ourselves as young people, what are we doing to hold those who hold such polarizing view to account what are doing as young people to make sure that such attitudes and views do not define our present and do not become part and parcel of what defines our future as this generation? Those are the questions we should be engaging on. And thank you very much, Ian. And thank you, Rachel, for raising that question.
Thank you for that answer, Siyabulela. So I think we actually have time for 2 more questions, so 1 each, if that's all right with you.
Sounds good.
So I have a question from Nicole, who wants to know what was the biggest challenge you faced as a newcomer when you first arrived to Canada?
Thank you, Nicole, for that question. I would say it was the fact that I knew no one. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone when I came here. And that really scared me, I suppose. The fact that I didn't have any friends or family over here. You know, if I needed anything, it really was all up to me. And, you know, obviously it's been a while now, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to meet a lot of very inspiring, very passionate people who are very kind to me, and they welcomed me as their friend and as part of their community. And I think that's one of the things that I love the most about Toronto and about Canada in general. It's that you fit in. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what it is that you do. You just fit in. It can be as random as you wish it to be, and you will be welcomed. You fit in, and you will find your own place. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aya. And to wrap up, a final question for you, Siyabulela. So a question from Serena, who says that the human race is long overdue to come together in the face of crisis. So how do you think we can bring more people together when the world we live in today isolates us more from each other and just keeps us connected online?
Thank you very much for that question. And I think that's a very important question. And it speaks into what my fellow panelist Aya was speaking on. I think, and I am of the view, and it's something that the human family, I call it the human family because we are one family, despite our differences and despite our creed, our religions, and all the things that we identify to. We are one family. So hence I use the term family more than the race. I think for me, how we should begin to define ourselves and how we should begin to understand ourselves as a human family is in 5 words. Diversity is essential for our sustainability. The future of the sustainability of the human family depends on diversity. The sustainability of the human family depends on inclusion. The minute we begin to understand that there is strength in our diversity, the minute we begin to use such terms that there is strength and there is power in our diversity, the minute we understand that united as a human race we stand, and of course divided we are going to fall, and of course those are some of the slogans that many in political settings normally use, but it is a true reality that united as a human race we are going to stand, but divided we fall. And there's one thing in more contemporary times that has shown us that the recent corona pandemic has shown us as a human race that if we can stand together, if we can band together, we'll be able to stand But if we stand in silos, if we operate in silos, we are definitely going to fall. That is one thing that the pandemic has taught us. And in fact, I would argue and say the pandemic and the period of the pandemic was a missed opportunity for the human race to come together. Because for me, there is no way where we are going to find a realized sustainability as a human family other than embracing our diversity. The fact that I can bring something that is unique into the table, and I can bring something that is unique in the table, and I can bring something that is unique in the table, and many of us in this conversation can bring something unique in the table. That would mean that we would realize true sustainability as a human family. So for me, diversity is essential for our sustainability. So therefore, we must prioritize inclusion at all times. And I say that as one coming from a country that was previously divided by a racialized system of governance called apartheid. Later on, they realized more than 50 years that, in fact, South Africa wouldn't be able to be sustainable without diversity, without embracing diversity, without embracing one another, and realize that such diversity is essential to our sustainability as a human family. So if we begin to think in such terms, I think there's so much that we can achieve as a human race than we can achieve divided. So thank you very much, Ian, and thank you very much, Aya, for such a beautiful story and a beautiful contribution in the debate. And thank you to the audience at large.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panel speakers. That was an incredible conversation. And thank you to everybody in the audience for those wonderful questions. Please don't let these conversations end with this dialogue. Continue to ask questions, continue to educate yourselves. So once again, thank you, Siyabulela and Aya, for making the time today. And with this, I would like to welcome back the lovely Rafia to support with the final Q&A for everybody in the audience. So please get ready for a chance to win some swag. Thank you.
So I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to do some fun trivia. But thank you, Ayan. I was truly completely in awe listening to all of the amazing speakers and getting an understanding of their different perspectives. We're so lucky to have you all share this space with us and provide these opportunities for the youth that are with us today. So with that being said, we're ending with a fun little trivia game. All you have to do is answer the multiple choice questions in the chat. And after the event, we'll take all of your answers and tally them up, and we'll select a winner to win some Summit swag. So let me just share my screen and we can get started. So the first question is, over the past 9 years, the global population of forcibly displaced people has one second. Has A, increased, B, decreased, or C, stayed the same? So you can select a letter and just pop it in the chat whenever you're ready. So just giving it another few seconds and I'll share the answer. So the right answer is that over the past 9 years, the global population of forcibly displaced people has in fact increased. As Ayan mentioned earlier in her presentation, we're seeing a mass global movement right now. Now on to the next question. How many displaced people are there in the world today? Is it A, 100,000, B, 5 million, C, 10 million, or D, 100 million? So take about a minute to get your answers in. Just select a letter and post it in the chat. So if you pick D, you're right. There are over 100 million people displaced in the world today. So let's move on to our next question about intersectionality. 1 second. Yes, so we'll be skipping a question, but what does intersectionality say about identity? So we have A, intersectionality recognizes the plurality of identities that one holds and addresses how the different categories that make us who we are continuously work together to create a unique experience of structural privilege and or discrimination in how we navigate the world. Or B, it's a perspective that recognizes that we are multifaceted beings, but views sources of oppression as separate and cumulative. So take a second to answer that, and we will share the right answer in just a second. So the right answer for this is A. As Ayan had mentioned earlier, intersectionality talks about how different identities come together and really shape someone's identity and the privileges or discrimination that they might face when they navigate the world. So coming in on question 4, who are refugees? Either A, refugees are people who are not happy with their wages and seek to make more money by moving to a different country, or are they B, refugees are people who have been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, violence, persecution, or environmental disasters and are protected under international law, or C, refugee is a term used to define people who live outside of their country of nationality. So take a second to answer that. And again, we'll share the answer in just a moment. All right, so the right answer for this is B, refugees are people who have been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, violence, persecution, or environmental disasters. And a key part of this answer is that refugee is a status that is protected under international law. So I think this is our second last question. Which 3 countries do the largest majority of refugees come from? Is it A, Somalia, Mozambique, and Myanmar, B, Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, or C, Bangladesh, Syria, and Uganda? So just a few more moments to get that answer in the chat. And the correct answer is B, Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan. As Ayan mentioned earlier in her presentation, more than half of the world's refugees come from these 3 countries, though others have faced conflict as well, from which refugees come from. And lastly, true or false, legally a refugee can be forced back into their home country. So is that true or is that false? So the answer to that question is in fact false. A refugee cannot be forced back to their home country because under international law that is not allowed. All right, thank you for playing trivia with us. We'll tally up your responses and whoever is the winner will be contacted and will win some Summit swag. Thanks for playing.
Thank you so much, Rafia. And thank you again to everyone for this amazing afternoon. Thank you to every participant here that dedicated some time to listen, learn, grow, and connect. It says a lot about the leaders that you are. And although the idea of taking action on a crisis of this magnitude may seem daunting, there are a bunch of small steps that all of us can take to support displaced groups and influence the systems that allow for people fearing for their safety and survival to be left stranded without access to the fundamental resources that all of us deserve. So thank you again for being a part of this important conversation. And don't forget that you will have the opportunity to connect with some of these remarkable leaders in a smaller group in the breakout room in a few minutes. So similar to the last summit, we challenge you to take action after this event, whether you educate yourself further on this issue, if you speak a different language, maybe you volunteer your time in an organization that supports newcomers as a translator, or even fundraising for a cause. Whatever it may be, remember that the smallest action you take can make the largest impact. So please fill in the activation link that is put in the chat and let us know how you'll take action and make impacts following the event for a chance to win a bunch of gifts.
Thanks, Ayan. And to your point, an advocate can look and feel different depending on what you're passionate about and how you take action about causes you care about. So with this, I also wanted to mention that we are calling all change makers ages 14 to 22 to apply to be part of Plan International Canada's Youth Council, which you are a part of. Applications are open until Friday, July 8th until 9 a.m. If you are interested in having a seat at the table alongside a group of national change makers who represent Plan International Canada, be sure to apply. You can find that link. In the chat, and we will share a quick promo video of the council now.
Being on Plan International Canada's Youth Council means being able to get a seat at the decision-making table. It means fostering a culture in which youth are consulted and their perspectives are validated.
To me, being on Plan International Youth Council means that I get to connect with like-minded youth from all across Canada.
The council is made of diverse and talented individuals who inspire me every day with their advocacy and their passion for issues surrounding youth.
As advisors, we use the power of our voice to bring a youth perspective to goals, programs, and activities at Plan International Canada.
Being an influencer on this council to me is about being a forceful representation of what it means to be a youth. And to me, that is someone who is unafraid to challenge the status quo.
To me, being an ambassador for Plan International Canada's Youth Council means that I use my voice to share our impact on all levels.
Other council members represent numerous youth voices, not only in Canada, but also globally.
It's an opportunity to empower and engage youth to build community, empathy, and to become active members in policymaking.
At its core, the Youth Council is for youth, by youth, and it's calling you to be part of the movement.
And again, just a reminder that the hiring for this is open until Friday, July 8th at 9 a.m. We can't wait to see your application and have you join the Youth Council. And now, just to wrap up, remember to join the breakout rooms to connect with some of these amazing guests in smaller groups. It's such a unique opportunity to connect with guests and youth themselves and make those network connections. Please use the chat below to join us for our 30-minute networking opportunity. We'll see you there. Thanks for joining.